Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining. My name's Sam Bevan and I'm the director of our emerging EMEA business here at Snap. Today, I'm so excited to launch Snap's first ever Visionary Club. The Snap Visionary Club is all about bringing together some of the world's leading e-commerce and direct-to-consumer brands to discuss all things shopping. We believe this club is going to help shape, evolve, and more importantly, set out what the future of shopping looks like for an entire generation. In practice, this club will provide a program focused on introducing you to the world of camera marketing, as well as introducing you to how you can use camera marketing in your upcoming holiday campaigns. This will include a series of events, best practice sharing, workshops, roundtable discussions, as well as helping you build your first custom augmented reality lens in support of our creative strategy team. While this club will come into full force in Q4, we are well aware that campaign planning is already well underway. For Q3, we'll be hosting both product, creative, and measurement workshops exclusively for our Snap Visionary Club members and their teams to ensure that you're set up and ready to go for the upcoming season. This process will then continue throughout Q4, where our team will provide white glove support and service to ensure that we drive real business results. That won't be the end. When we head into next year, we'll regroup with all of you to discuss how we can finesse the Snap Visionary Club offerings to ensure that we're providing the best service and support in order to help you scale. To get this process started, we have a great lineup of conversations today to help inspire you. Our Vice President of EMEA, Claire Velotti, will be joined by Maeve Kieran, the founder of leading consumer trends agency, Foresight Factory, to discuss the findings of our recent global study into the future of shopping. Then the editorial director of High Snobiety, Christopher Morency, will be joined by Will Skugel, Snap's global director of creative strategy, for a deep dive into the evolving relationship between e-commerce and the fashion industry. But first, to get started, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome our Director of Product, Per Sandal, who's going to join me in conversation to discuss in more detail Snap's roadmap and our upcoming product offerings. Per, do you want to come off the mic and introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm thrilled to be here for the kickoff of Snap's Visionary Club and the focus on e-commerce. Couldn't be more excited to be meeting with everybody today and spending a little bit of time sharing what we've been working on in the product team here at Snapchat.
So a lot of the people on the line would have dialed into our recent Partnership Summit. We launched a lot of new products, a lot of new innovation, really just showing that innovation is the heart of everything we do at Snap. But it'd be great if you could bring this to light of what this means actually for e-commerce advertisers and some of the highlights.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple weeks ago, our team kind of brought to life a lot of the projects that we've been working on for the last 18 months at our Snap Partner Summit. And so, I think a few of those that really impact the way that we think about commerce and the way that we think about shopping. And to break those down, first are the highlights that we've done in augmented reality. Our teams have been hard at work building out our AR shopping features and really allowing the camera to become the center of shopping on Snapchat. And if you think about where we've had commerce and kind of activity on Snap to date, that's really existed in only one tab of the 5 tabs in our environment, on the Discover tab. But now with the introduction of camera shopping and the addition of Screen Shop into our Memories product, we're starting to make more surfaces on Snap become incredibly relevant for marketers who are focusing on highlighting their product or providing our users access to high quality goods, services, and products that they can immediately transact, either from our native checkout experiences integrated with Shopify or by kicking a user to a web view to complete those transactions. In addition to these areas, SPS for us allowed us to surface for the first time a bunch of work that we've been working on around the spectacles unit and the business units there. And we're really excited to kind of for the first time, to surface some of our long-term research that we've been doing around how the physical world and the augmented world can work together. And I think that's an incredibly interesting way to think about the evolution of commerce. If we've learned anything during the pandemic, it's that e-commerce is continuing to push forward and continuing to try new angles. But we haven't really fully solved all the problems of understanding and experimenting how the digital world and the physical world can interact. And I think when we think about Snap, we think about what we've done with our AR and augmented reality products, as well as what we've been thinking about with spectacles and the introduction of machine learning lenses. We're actually finally creating an environment where advertisers can actually surface and allow fully shoppable experiences and full try-on experiences to happen directly within the camera and view those as if they were part of the physical world around you. And I think when we think about the summation of SPS or Snap Partner Summit, what we've really seen is we've started to introduce this next journey in what it means to be commerce and what it means to shop inside of a mobile environment.
It definitely sounds that e-commerce is coming to be at the heart of Snapchat, which is super exciting for all of us. It'd be great to understand, when we look at this product roadmap today, what do you think e-commerce players should be most excited about?
It's a great question, Sam. I think to talk a little bit about where we've been, I earlier mentioned that Tab 4 had really been the experience where we allowed advertisers to come in and surface those products. And that's been allowed to kind of power ROAS by developing our algorithms around goal-based bidding for pixel purchase and driving high transaction volume coming from our ads that existed on that Tab 4. But now we've started to introduce and started to beta test GBB pixel purchase for augmented reality. And what this allows advertisers to do is actually focus and use the camera assets that they've created, whether those live on a brand profile or they're simply just ad units, and optimize those for purchase events that happen down funnel. And I think what we're seeing here is that advertisers now have an opportunity to reach customers with video ads on Snap, and then also with a new form of augmented reality marketing, but optimize those both for purchase events. And so from my perspective, the ability to take kind of now 2 screens of Snap instead of just one and optimize those for the same business outcomes is something that is incredibly exciting for advertisers. And this provides the advertiser much more surface area on our product to reach kind of high intent consumers and ones that our algorithms actually think are highly calibrated to make a purchase. And so from where kind of we sit on the product side, what this allows us to do is actually provide significantly more reach for the ad products that now allow you to optimize for purchase events. So our journey kind of ahead of us is going to be really allowing for advertisers to come in, easily create objects, whether that's with Lens Studio or Lens Web Builder, and push those immediately into ad campaigns for the same optimization goals and targets that they've had before.
Amazing. Augmented reality, virtual try-on. It sounds like the future if we were discussing this 2-3 years ago, but the fact it is available now for pretty much everyone and anyone is super exciting. You talked a little bit there about having a larger presence on Snap. We recently also announced the launch of these public profiles. And I think for a lot of businesses, it was like, okay, what are these on Snap? What is the reason for having one? And then realistically, do we have any recommendations for how you can get started with them? It was our first attempt at organic offering really on Snap for brands. So it'd be great if you could just walk us through a bit of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my first recommendation would be to build one and set one up. And as you mentioned, Sam, this is really the first foray that we've done into organic offerings on Snap. So we're still very early in this journey. So early feedback is really going to help shape the development environment and what our long-term roadmap looks like here. So the faster you build and kind of start to experiment and provide that feedback back to our teams, the better we can build a product to kind of suit the needs long-term of e-commerce brands in these areas. And so, I think what we've kind of been thinking about when it comes to public profiles, kind of a quick highlight reel of what's coming up there is not only is this going to be the home of your highlights and your AR assets that live there, but it's also really going to be the hub where we start to think about how do we connect your advertising to your organic presence before. And so our ads will start linking to brand profiles. If you have set up a brand profile, this option is available now. And so, you have another option to kind of gain an audience by users kind of tapping that icon in the top left of an ad and immediately being moved to the brand profile to learn more about your brand, click to a website, or experience the augmented reality that you surface there. And on top of that, we're working on kind of some longer term areas around how we can integrate the brand profile to be part of our advertising area. And so you've already probably started to see this if you've been experimenting with brand profiles, where anything that you add to a brand profile immediately becomes an asset in the media library within Ads Manager. You can really see that this organic ecosystem that we've started to build on Snap is connecting very seamlessly to our paid ecosystem. And this really allows social media teams, as well as kind of marketing teams as a whole, to actually work on overall Snap strategies that are not just tied to paid media, but rather tied to the whole presence that a brand has on Snap. And I think this is the first time that we've really been able to offer kind of a full 360 about how you engage with us in both an organic and a paid perspective. And that to me is something that I think is really, really exciting. And it's going to fuel a lot of future development, including the ability to create ads directly from a profile, which is something that we're working on for a late 2021 launch.
Awesome. And I think, hit the nail on the head. The best way to get started is to set a profile up in the first place. And I know we've got a lot of people on today who have already started that journey, but for everyone else, really encourage you to just get going. We talked about this being the home, the hub of where we're going to store all of your content. We've talked a lot about camera marketing, the augmented reality, but if we actually take that step back with AR, what role do we see it in the consumer journey? Do we see this playing into the shopping journey? What role do we really see that AR has in the shopping journey for a consumer?
Yeah, very interesting question. And I'll try not to ramble too much here, but if I am, cut me off in that area. But I think when we start to think about augmented reality, one of the areas that we need to think about is that this is really shopping in the new world that we're kind of moving into. As we learned during the pandemic, online e-commerce is absolutely booming. But that doesn't mean that we're without struggles in this area. Return rates are really high when you don't have the ability to try on things, and we're addressing that problem with an acquisition that we did of Fit Analytics, which should allow us to give you a better understanding of size, fit, and how something actually really looks and feels on your body. We've also recently acquired another company called Vertebrae that allows us to make AR assets incredibly quickly and incredibly easily for our partners. And so when we start to think about what AR is, it actually really is kind of that backbone that creates that same physical experience that you used to have by going to a store, trying something on, and checking out, and doing that individual purchase. And so when you think about commerce as a whole, I would really divide commerce into these areas of part one of it being shopping, which is top of funnel, discovery, understanding products you like, and then checkout, being able to close that transaction, provide the merchant with your information about billing and about where to ship that product to. And so what we've really been thinking about with augmented reality is how do we both empower brands to create more discovery environments, and then also provide them the ability to kick the user to the correct purchase environment, whether that's some sort of integration that we've done on our platform or directly to a merchant's website or to a mini that we've started to build out on Snap from our developer ecosystem. And so when we think about it, AR is really starting to, for us, to replace that feeling of, going to the store and going to the mall with your friends, having that experience to shop, and also really that ability to share kind of what this might look like on you and how to experience it and communicate with your friends about that buying process and that shopping process. And so what we've really tried to do is build all of that emotional experience into the digital world and really kind of tried our best to replace kind of that notion of physical try-on, physical shopping with everything in augmented reality.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think increasingly you talked about the take backs. More and more consumers, especially Gen Z and millennials, are very keenly aware of these economic and the social issues that can happen with goods just being tried on once and then going into landfill, right the way through to just consumers wanting things there and then, the readiness of products. And I think the example that I love is, I think pre-pandemic, I always used to hate going to shoe shops and looking at the person next to you, not necessarily even wearing socks, trying on the shoes that you may get next. The fact that now you can just avoid that entire social experience and actually just from the leisure of your home, flick between different pairs and not necessarily have to worry about all those other things that we just talked on. a lot of people on this group, and we can see quite a few live questions coming in, are also around the recent updates from Apple. It would be great if you could just talk a little bit around how you see Snap evolving its products in line with the new world of post-ATT.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think first and foremost, Snap has always been a very privacy-centric environment. Our policies and kind of the way that we've run the business to date has always been deletion by default. And so, coming into the changes with iOS 14.5 and ATT, we actually have felt we've been in a very good state and kind of a very good position since we've been kind of working under these areas where we don't think that a data trail should exist on one of our users for over a certain amount of time, and we shouldn't collect information without a key value exchange. And one of those areas, just to kind of dive into kind of the philosophy, is really around, if you think about our product GeoFilters, where if you turn on location sharing, you get that information and that social context that you can enrich when you're creating a Snap and you're creating content within our environment. And so that give and take is really fundamental to the way that we think about designing our consumer products and the way that we design our advertising products. And so to dive into ATT and iOS 14, I do think that we're entering a world where many companies are now trying to catch up to us and really kind of have that same privacy-centric approach that we've taken kind of since the beginning of our company and the beginning of our advertising business. And so as we think about the ATT roadmap and what we're doing to help customers and e-commerce advertisers there, we know that we need to continue to improve our reporting speeds and making sure that we give our customers access to real-time data. We're also working on tools to provide estimated conversion information so that brands can have a very good sense kind of as that some event is happening, if we can predict that a conversion is going to happen as an outcome there, to give greater transparency, to provide fast action on our advertisements and provide them the ability to optimize in real time. We're going to pipe this not only to our reporting infrastructure that you see in Ads Manager and our API, but also back to our optimization algorithm. So we've got the ability to optimize even quicker within that environment. And so I think when it comes to where we really see this ecosystem evolving, definitely see kind of that ability for more companies and more handset manufacturers to come in with similar policies and similar rules. And we need to be incredibly agile in order to kind of solve this and respond to it and make sure that we offer customers top-notch optimization and real-time reporting as we move forward. And I think as long as we're able to maintain kind of those areas of real-time reporting as well as high levels of optimization, we're going to be able to continue to iterate on our ad formats, which is really where Snap kind of shines and provides a unique customer experience and something that you can't find on any other platform. And so, as we continue to evolve, I do think that, privacy at the core of our service is critical for us to establish the long-term success and customer trust. And that's an area where we've been incredibly positive as we've kind of looked at opt-in rates, and we've looked at information that we're still kind of gathering and able to collect based off opt-in users. And that allows us to continue to create high quality targeting segments, as well as very high quality optimization algorithms to deliver the best ROAS to our partners as possible.
Absolutely. And I think I love the fact you talked about, just as a philosophy, Snap has always been privacy by design. And I think for everyone on the line, hearing that we're going to continue to build towards, I think you used the phrase top-notch optimization, as well as real-time reporting, is exactly what I think the audience wanted to hear, which is great. We are coming up to time, and so I'm going to end on a very broad question, and you can take it wherever you want, Per. But what excites you most about shopping in Snap?
This is a great question, Sam, and one that I think myself and our product team think about a lot. And there's a lot here. I think we touched a little bit on some of the acquisitions that we've been doing in this space, and so there's been an amazing opportunity to kind of meet a ton of talent and see some very interesting companies and how we can figure out how to integrate those and encourage us to kind of build the future and push forward. But I think if I could break this up into two answers, the first is kind of this notion that I've been thinking about a lot when it comes to the difference between digital and physical. And I think an area that, from my youth growing up is that notion of like going shopping, going to the mall was something that was so prevalent in my childhood, that transcending that into kind of a digital mall where you can see all these same experiences And we've seen great examples that we've been able to do over the last couple of years with augmented reality, from the Lego pop-up shop that we were able to build, where you really had that ability to enter the space. And now if we merge that with what we've been thinking about with our augmented reality products, our AR shopping, the ability to use a dynamic product ad within an augmented reality environment and optimize that for purchase, we've actually kind of moved this notion of the social shopping that happened in the physical world into the digital world. And so this notion of digital real estate, I think, is like an incredibly interesting concept for us to continue to pursue. And then kind of, the final notion for me, and from like a technologist side of myself, this is an area where I'm continually fascinated, is what we're thinking about with specs and kind of some of the evolutions that we've seen in the hardware space, both with spectacles in our world, what we're seeing from the Apple handsets. The introduction of our ability to perceive the environment around us, not just from the way that the camera can recognize, understand, and classify images. And you're seeing a little bit of that come out in our consumer product with ScreenShop that we've introduced in the Memories tab. But you can really imagine how you could be able to do this with LiDAR or with the Spectacles unit. And I think this is the first time in computing where we've actually shifted away the traditional input device from your mouse, your keyboard, your stylus, your finger on a touchscreen, which inherently has a ton of latency between how you tell the CPU to do something and the information that you receive back, to the ability where you as the human are perceiving the environment at the same rate and the same time as the computer. And so we've actually switched computing from this latency problem to a threading problem where you're trying to understand all of this information in parallel. And that becomes a very, very interesting way that we should think about the future of computing. And so for me, I think those two areas and that ability to bridge physical and digital are what's the most exciting with me about shopping on Snap. And I think we're in for a very exciting future. And it's really due to the feedback that we get from our advertising partners that pushes us forward here and gives us many new ideas and kind of forces us to push the envelope, to come up with new ideas both in our products and our optimization suites.
Absolutely, and I love that, bringing the social online ultimately, and that blending of the offline and online really is at the forefront of anyone. And I think everyone on this line, it can't be more excited to get testing with all these tools. That is all we have time for with Per today. It's actually coming up to 2 a.m. for him in LA. So thank you so much again, Per, for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Sam, and thanks everybody for your partnership, and looking forward to hearing feedback and any product feedback that you have as we continue these sessions throughout the year.
Amazing, thanks, Per. We're now going to hand over the call to Claire and Maeve to discuss our latest shopping trends report.
Hello everyone, I am Snapchat's VP of EMEA, Claire Velotti, and today I am joined by the amazing Maeve Quarren, the founder of leading consumer trends agency Foresight Factory. Now recently we partnered with her company to publish a global study, and something very close to my heart, which is the future of shopping. And it's really about analysing the behaviours and the shifts that we're seeing around the world, really as a result of the pandemic, which we know has significantly impacted how really we currently shop, and no doubt how we will continue to shop. The studies really explored the sort of looking into the changes in consumer attitudes to new trends, and actually specifically innovative retail technology that's really come through in our findings. So I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to really unpack the findings with Maeve. So I don't want to waste any more time. I'd love to get started. So thank you for joining me, Maeve, for hopefully what will be a really interesting conversation.
Not at all. Delighted to be here, Claire.
Now, the thing that struck me the most is I think what we've all heard so much about the pandemic is the impact on e-commerce and how everyone's gone online. But what the study has highlighted, and I see it come with myself from a kind of sample size of one and how I like to shop, the physical retail is really set to make a big comeback post-pandemic. What do you think are the kind of main draws why we're seeing that consumers have that desire to see physical retail come back?
Well, I think, it's human nature above all else. We are social creatures, and we like being in spaces with other people around us. Shopping is an extension of our leisure time. It's how we enjoy ourselves, as well as the utilitarian side of it. And I think we just relish the opportunity to be out and meet with people in that environment. And I think the reality is that in-store can bring a lot of advantages too. So we probably miss having conversations with things like well-informed shop assistants. We miss the ability to look around us and be inspired by a broader range on shelf, for example. So I think it's really important to understand that this is a perfectly natural return to what we've always enjoyed. But I think it's also fair to say that it's not like we'll just go back in store and forget everything we've learned over the last 18 months. I don't think it'll be like that. I think it'll be a far more gentle evolution back to a world where we embrace both shopping in real life, but also continuing to shop online.
Yeah. And do you think, because, I feel like when we talk about this, we always say, oh, but then of course, it will damage e-commerce. I don't see the world so binary, but what have we found in the study that shows, is it at the cost of e-com, the return of physical? And if so, maybe what sectors do you think will benefit or kind of be most impacted?
Yeah, no, great question. Like you, I don't think we should think in these binary terms. I see it very much as an and or, not an or proposition. I think one of the things that the study highlighted is that more people will continue to online shop than will pull back from that, if you like. So 25% say that they will continue to shop more online than they did prior to the pandemic, versus just 12 who say that they'll do that a lot less. So I think, the proof is there that people will want to do both. And if anything, e-commerce is set to continue to, intensify, if you like. And I think there are absolutely, I wouldn't say winners or losers so much as industries for whom that hybrid world will just naturally add and continue to augment the experience of your average consumer. And those are things, the obvious candidates like beauty, but also fashion. Interestingly, luxury, I think, where technology perhaps allows us to experiment in spaces where perhaps we felt we couldn't go or not as easily.
And interesting, we're hearing that when we speak to a lot of our clients. That's very much a focus of building that direct consumer relationship and thinking about how you enhance it, which I think has always been there. I think now people are just having to think about it in a different way. And what we saw is obviously over 50% of global consumers actually saying they miss the social aspect of shopping, which I think we all do when you go shopping, that connection with a friend or a family member when you're in that moment. What advice would you sort of be giving to kind of the e-com players, how they can bring that aspect into the experience?
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because I think it depends. I think there are a number of ways to do that, whether you're talking about in their environment or whether they look to, and I think they should partner with other social commerce platforms and other social spaces where the shopper is already connecting to others. So I think, there's a blend of things to do, but just in terms of a top line perspective on that, I think one of the things that's absolutely critical is more interaction. And I think expertise is a really important part of that. So giving consumers ideas around what suits them, how that works with their particular looks. Are there more unique things that they could try? What complements them? What's trendy this season? All of the things that basically you're either going to turn directly to your friends and family for and do outside of that world if the retailer doesn't do it for you, and also just to help people along the advice layers that they're just naturally looking for. So I think there's a lot online retailers can do to make that feel more human, more present. I think the other thing that I would probably advise an online player or somebody playing in the online space to engage with is better loyalty. I think that is still very functional. It typically in an online space comes with 10% off your first purchase. I mean, that's just so ubiquitous and so frankly not terribly engaging. And when you look at the volume of options we have online, what does that really change? It certainly doesn't encourage a return and a relationship side to that. So I think we need to think about how we do repeat purchasing and personalization and the relationship side of it much, much better.
Yeah, and you're so right, because I find myself, I'm obviously a huge online shopper, but before I go to the sort of checkout, I see myself looking for a voucher code of some sort. It's like my expectation. And that's
Absolutely.
not right. I'm having a great experience. But really touching on this flip side that I think we all know. I actually use myself again. I had to buy my daughter's school shoes. I always buy it in July for September, and my default would always go into store. And this time I was like, I haven't got time. I just haven't got patience to go and line up and get a ticket to get her feet measured. And I bought them online. And if I drill down a little bit further into really augmented reality, and that's something obviously it's Snap, we play a big role in. Clearly, I am going to say to brands, you need to be thinking about augmented reality and what that means for your business. But I think sometimes the reaction is that's the sort of fun thing, but I don't need to do it. It's not a must in my marketing or business plans. Yeah. What would you be saying to brands now when they think about augmented reality and what they should be really sort of doing?
Well, I think there's a couple of really important things to say about that. I mean, I'll admit I was surprised to see how much people would be willing to engage with it, but also even go out of their way to engage with it. So I think that's quite a high threshold. And yes, okay, it's easy to agree with that. But as we have become adjusted to a world that's sort of always on, I think we don't think in online, offline, in the same way. I think we don't think in one-dimensional, multi-dimensional any longer. I think we just expect a more blended, hybrid way of life. I think the other thing I would say to people is, this is not a novelty experience any longer. This is a conversion technique. I think something like 56% of consumers, if I'm remembering the data correctly, who've used it have said that it's helped them actually go on to make the purchase. So I think actually this really matters in terms of keeping consumers with you and getting them over the payment line. And I think the reality is, if you look at where younger generations are headed, it is so native and so pervasive to their expectations that I would fear seriously that without that, it's going to be very difficult to bring new consumers with us.
Yeah, totally. And I know we touched on this there's not such thing can be binary about online, offline. You just touched on, I totally agree. There is no consumer that goes, I'm going online now. They're just going to shop. But I think I've always believed the power of mobile, that it plays a part in the physical and digital world. So how do you see maybe mobile more broadly connecting the two approaches?
Well, I suppose I think the easiest thing is for that to have a relationship with the consumer that sits beyond the physical or virtual spaces that we're in. I think brands could go a lot further to create an ecosystem that lives within the space that you're in as a consumer, so that it would carry things like we talked about, loyalty, purchase histories, things like that, the convenience of payment techniques and so on and so forth. I think the other side of it is this social interaction that we talked about right at the beginning. I think very high numbers of consumers, and again, particularly millennials and Gen Z, they're using things like photos and social reactions as part of how they're shopping. They want the opinion of family and friends. They want reviews. They want to know what other people like them are going to react positively to. And again, it's easier to do that through perhaps a social platform that you're already engaged with than it is necessarily to then go into another branded experience or worse than that, not at all. So I think retailers, brands are going to have to figure out how their universe, first of all, becomes more naturally extended so that mobile cuts across the whole experience, but also that it links up to the other platforms that consumers are in already. And I think, inevitably more clever, seamless partnerships are going to be drawn up as a result of the progress that we're making.
I'm conscious we haven't really run out of time, but I have to end on one final question. First of all, I'd say encourage people to read the report, because genuinely it's some really interesting insights, that things you may have not expected. So given the fact that it was you and your business that did the report, I know it inside out, what advice would you be giving kind of post the report and the findings of some quick things they could be doing to get ready for the expectations of their consumers?
I think there's so many things that are both functional and very immersive that they could be doing, and we could go through a number of those. But for me, the biggest thing is think in terms of a hybrid mindset. Don't think of separate worlds any longer. And, even you and I have been studying this and living in this space still have to force ourselves psychologically to move beyond that. I think that's still part of what's culturally evolving for us. But in terms of a retail environment, I think that's absolutely critical now. So I think, break down the sort of virtual or physical barriers. I think the other thing would be to view shopping as an always-on immersive experience in whichever environment you're choosing to operate in. I think there's no room for, well, I'm going to win because we provide ultra convenience, or I'm going to win because it's so social and so fun. We want both of those things. Consumers are desperately greedy, and we might argue rightly so. If we're going to engage better and with greater experiences, then we really need to live up to that. I think the other thing that I would say is, I think we still need to work harder at personalization, recognizing the consumer. We've touched on some of the things, their size and shape and fit, the trends they love, the social values they carry, the habits they have, the loyalty they'd like, a brand, the commitment that they'd want to see that the brand recognizes them. These are all really important things. And I just think that technology helps us to add and augment all of these experiences. And I would just encourage everybody to absolutely go after it all.
Yeah, and I would actually build on personalization. It needs to be used to add value to the consumer, not to just be used to sell at them. And I think there's a real distinction. To date, personalization is too focused on how can I push something to a consumer, not how can I really add value. I feel really strongly about that. A huge thank you. We could talk for ages. It's a passion of mine, but I feel really strongly about this hybrid world. And I think that would be what I'd ask anyone sort of watching us today to go back and think about their businesses and how you're structured, to be thinking about one consumer, one journey, because I think that's really important, because that's how the consumer is thinking. So a huge thank you. Another shout out to say, go read the study, because genuinely there are some fascinating insights there. So thank you again, Maeve.
Thanks for having me. Really enjoyable chat.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Chris and I have just been sitting here nattering away. It looks like we're digitally distant. Actually, we're just next door to each other. I'm Will Skugel, Director of Creative Strategy here at Snapchat across EMEA. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you're enjoying all of the content so far. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Chris from Highsnobiety, where he is Editorial Director. I think one of the brilliant things about fashion overall is that often we see fashion lead and create trends that are just outside of clothing and actually sit in many other aspects of the world that affect our daily life. And in particular, at the moment, I think one of the areas that fashion is leading in is e-commerce and the retail experience and the shifts that we're seeing that have been expedited to a certain degree by the recent and ongoing pandemic. So thank you, Chris, for joining us. I thought we would kick off, if you don't mind, by hearing just a little bit about yourself, your career, and how you have ended up as Editorial Director at Highsnobiety, and a little bit about Highsnobiety as well as a platform and publishing brand.
Thank you, Will. So as Will mentioned, we're literally sitting across from each other in different rooms, but it looks like we're far away. My name is Christopher. I'm based here in London, and I work for Highsnobiety, which used to be a publisher. We've now moved more into the brand territory, working very closely with brands, both within and outside the fashion space. What my role basically is to look more to the future. So I head up the insights team on the editorial side, along with our other editorial team based in New York, Berlin, and LA, and here in London now as well. And something we're really passionate about at Highsnobiety is to always make sense of what's happening in youth culture. So we're very much focused around youth culture, trends that are happening within their consumption behavior, and also where it's going. So that's what we look at a bit. As I said, we work a lot closely with brands. So we'll speak a bit about that today as well.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Chris. So Highsnobiety are very well known as I guess one of the kind of foremost influencers, fashion futurists from an editorial perspective, having predicted and actually shaped lots of the trends that we see in fashion, in particular in youth culture. But can you tell us a little bit about your editorial vision and the editorial agenda of Highsnobiety, so the audience can get a little bit of a sense for the content that you guys put out?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm half Dutch, half Canadian. So I used to live in Amsterdam about 6 years ago when I was working at Vice at the time. So that was outside of the fashion space. Then I slowly moved into fashion, and my old job was at the Business of Fashion, also here in London, where I headed up the youth culture vertical when we were setting that up. And one of the questions I had back then was, why can't we apply that same lens that we were applying to the business side of fast fashion businesses and the luxury industry, also to the youth culture industry, right? So the Nikes of the world, the Supremes of the world, emerging designers, emerging retailers. We took that thinking to Highsnobiety back when it was still very much associated with a lot of our competitors. Back then, Highsnobiety, this is 3 years ago, was still pretty focused on what's happening now. You know, a lot of the releases around new products, around of new retailers. The shift I wanted to bring from Business of Fashion to Highsnobiety was that same way of thinking of, yes, but what does that mean? What impact does this news or this bigger drop or this collection have on youth culture? Why is this happening? And where is it going from here? So we took that way of thinking across the team to actually set up a bigger insights division, working with brands closely, especially listening to our audience. I think that's very important. And connecting the two a lot, whether that's through editorial on the front end side or on the back end side with our brand partnerships.
So it sounds like such an incredibly interesting place to be. I mean, you're literally within the beating heart of cultural shifts among the youth and among Gen Z. Obviously, the recent pandemic has affected many industries in lots of different ways. I'm quite interested to understand a little bit more about the changes that you've seen recently, and in particular, the positive shifts that you're seeing from a fashion and retail perspective, and what's been really expedited and driven by the pandemic and some of the things that your insights team is surfacing.
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the biggest things that I've seen, I can only always speak, yes, as an editor and like having conversations with brands and our audience, but I can only speak for myself as a consumer's point of view, right? How do I view brands and how do I view retailers? Something that I think, everyone on this call and, Will, you as well have seen is this idea around this humanization of brands and retailers, right? Because of this increased level of transparency that the audience now requires from brands. We also want them to have the same values as us to a certain extent. We want them to guide us where we used to be guided by, older brothers and sisters or cousins or whatever it is. We kind of humanize these brands that they need to believe the same things. That's really expedited over the pandemic, which is I've seen. And, one of the biggest things that we saw with Highsnobiety was it was something like 89% of our audience can actually see if the people behind the brands are actually part of the culture that they want to be part of and that the brand says that they're part of. So there is this bigger bullshit meter, if I can say it that way, this BS meter, where people want to speak to brands, but they also want to hold brands a lot more accountable. I think the positive thing of that, which has happened during the pandemic, is that brands can be incredibly proactive with humanizing their brand and by taking stances around things. I think that's the conversation that many people have within their brands is, what do we speak out against? What do we speak out for? Who are we as a brand? What do we stand for? And what don't we do? And I think the right answer for that, in my opinion, again, from the consumer's point of view, is you do kind of have to pick a side. You have to become more humanistic as a brand and tell your audience what you're a part of.
That's a really interesting point on being human as a brand and humanistic as a brand. And I think it leads nicely onto this idea of the retail experience and actually the way that people experience brands, because I do think that one of the ways brands have traditionally connected with people and spoken about their values and expressed themselves is through the actual retail experience or through other branded experiences that they might create. And obviously over the last 16 months plus, it's been harder than ever for brands to have an actual moment of physical connection with people as retail spaces have been less accessible. And certainly, I think for anyone that enjoys shopping, you also enjoy that idea of discovering something new, trying something on, the actual experience of being in a retail space. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of the shifts that you've been seeing in that space and how brands are addressing that opportunity through digital experiences and e-com.
Yeah, Will, we were speaking about this a bit earlier before this chat about, having to be where the consumer is. And that sounds very logical, and everyone on this call thinks about that frequently, but it really rings true today, especially, right? The thing we were just speaking about is, what does the role of a physical store look like today? When that consumer does walk into your doors, into that physical space, should that offering even be the same as on the e-commerce side, for instance, or on the social media side? What is the role that social media plays, for instance? I think everything falls into what I call a brand universe. And the way I would almost describe this is, if as a brand or as an e-commerce player or whoever you are within or outside of the fashion space, let's say you're a city, or let's say you're like a smaller town, you might have your main headquarters, which is where you make all the decisions. Then you might have your bakery, your flower shop, etc. What would that flower shop look like if you would have a flower shop as a brand, for instance? What would the clothing look like? What would the store look like? Who would your neighbors be? Who would the people around your brand be in that town, the inhabitants? I think every touch point that the consumer has nowadays needs to be consistent when you're forming that brand vision, that brand universe, like we say. If we speak about trends more specifically, what's an interesting stat is, to riff a bit off of this humanization of brands, is that with Highsnobiety, I think it's about 89% of our readers now also follow the people or the creative directors behind the brand. That's a huge shift that we've seen since a few years ago, and it's stretched a lot further than just the creative director and the leaders. It's also the friends of the house. It's the influencers around the brands. It's even the people that work inside the company. We're really looking for that humanistic approach, and especially with social media, when you're looking at your feed and you have your local restaurants next to your news outlet, next to your favorite brands, you can't act as a brand in that ecosystem, right? So you have to act differently on each of the channels. But we'll speak a bit more about that soon, I think.
That's a really, really great point. And I think on that idea of brands need to be where people are, and increasingly that's been perceived as something that's quite difficult to achieve, certainly through the pandemic. But one of the things that we're talking about a lot, and I know it will have come up within some of these sessions, is this idea of brands needing a camera strategy. And I think that is very specifically focused on this idea that certainly with Gen Z, they've been previously perceived to be a generation that are hard to reach, a generation with short attention spans. But actually, it's a little bit of a misnomer when we see every day on Snapchat, literally hundreds of millions of people opening up the app and using the camera to navigate the world, to add a creative layer to their world as a tool for utility. We see a huge amount of attention within the camera, which means that as brands start to think about how they can use that to connect with people, it actually means that they can be present through a shared experience. And I think that we'll all be familiar with this idea of digital strategy being built around the right person in the right place at the right time. And for me, with the camera, that's almost the purest articulation of that. So when someone opens up the camera and invites a brand to share a moment with them through augmented reality, it's on their terms. There is no right person or right place or right time. It's someone choosing to launch the brand in that moment, very much like it's someone choosing to walk into a shop and browse the items or try something on. I think in that respect, that idea of augmented reality in the camera creating a moment of shared experience is a huge opportunity for brands when you think about the amount of attention being given in that moment. And we're certainly seeing loads of other interesting digital trends emerge and having emerged over the last few months during the pandemic. And I think that one of the things we were discussing earlier when we were deep in conversation was this idea of is fashion, or does fashion even have to be just about the physical item anymore? Or can it be about other slightly less tangible items too? I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and what you're seeing there.
Yeah, I think the first thing that people think about is obviously NFTs and all these digital skins, etc. when they think about intangible versions of selling, right? And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think a lot of brands and retailers need to expand their horizons a bit and act as brands first over being a fashion brand necessarily, or being a whatever brand is, consumer brands. You're just a brand in general. And I remember having this conversation with Tommy Hilfiger about a year ago. And I was asking, what's next for you? Because someone who's built everything, whether that's kids wear, women's wear, men's wear, he has a lot of different sub-labels as well. Where do you even take it from there? Where do you scale a brand when you've already reached almost every person in the world? And he said, we think of ourselves as a brand, exactly this. How can we sell something beyond fashion? So he talked about creating maybe a media company of his own. He talked about going more into the hotel side of it, the experiential side. He talked about more going into the tech side. And I think that's when it becomes interesting. Back to that, that town analogy of brands, whoever you are, being a town or a city. What then does that flower shop look like? Or what does that festival look like that you would host? What are all the pillars in your brand outside of the actual selling that make your brand your brand? Who are the people around that brand? What is the infrastructure? How many stores do you have? What's that experience like online? And how can you then apply this entire real estate, whether that's digital or physical, to something different than just selling? A store isn't just a store to sell clothing. A store is a physical space for people to connect, for people to come in to learn more about the brand. Different brands are testing these things out. Same thing is with social media. Same thing is with e-commerce. These are digital real estate parts of your brand that you can use for very different things, to educate, to entertain, to inform, to connect. And I think brands have to really start thinking in that way, that respect. And we can name some examples a bit later, but
yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting point around the idea of the digital retail space versus the physical retail space. And I think as we're seeing more brands across more verticals, not just fashion, create augmented reality retail experiences to drive trial, to drive sales. Increasingly, and obviously this is maybe further down the line and not necessarily happening tomorrow, but does that start to affect the relevancy of a physical retail space and what that actually means? What do you see that becoming and the role that plays?
I mean, you're literally taking the shopping experience into someone's house, not even into someone's house, into wherever that person is. And I think there's a few layers, right? Once upon a time, if you wanted to shop, you had to go to the physical shop. You had to take the bus or the car, whatever it was, to go to that shop. That experience connected to that journey would be as important as getting into the shop itself. Now everything has become so easy with e-commerce. That was kind of version 2.0 of shopping, right? Then social commerce came online in a certain extent with what are your friends buying? How can you work with buying on e-commerce or on the social media platforms? Augmented reality is that fourth layer, because now you can basically shop wherever you are. Yes, you can go to an e-commerce shop on your phone, wherever you are, but it's very different when you can literally try something on, whether you're at a friend's house, you can try it on with your friends, you can try it on in your house, between working hours. You're literally almost diminishing the need for that physical retail experience anymore. And again, back to my earlier point, then it becomes really interesting to think about what does that physical space represent if shopping is happening elsewhere, at least a big part of that shopping is happening elsewhere. What else can you then do in that space? And I remember speaking to Jose Neves from Farfetch a few weeks ago, and I asked him about this brown store in London that they just built, which is their first kind of pivot into the store of the future concept that they're trialing. And it's funny because you walk into that physical space and you can't see any tech. And he basically told me, if you want tech to be intertwined with physical retail, you don't need to even see it. It needs to help the consumer journey. And of course, you have to get consumer data to the extent that they're comfortable with, but you're not supposed to see it. So one of the good examples with augmented reality that they do is you go to their watch section where they have watches anywhere up to 10K, up to 200K special editions. You can scan the code very easily on their app or even on your normal phone and put it on your wrist. And you can actually see to the precision of like the millimeter what that looks like, that watch. And that then becomes a very experiential way of shopping, which kind of merges these two worlds, which I think is a big future of that.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think product trial is certainly something that we're seeing explode on Snapchat and within the camera and with augmented reality. And certainly with the announcement this morning of our partnership with Vertebrae, we've got a really positive future ahead of us in terms of shifting the retail experience into a more democratized one, I guess, overall.
Yes.
The live signal has just gone off, which means it's time for my last question, which I'll try and make as broadly useful as possible to everybody watching. When it comes to capturing the next generation of consumers, what should brands be mindful of when communicating to Gen Z? And I think that's more of a broad point as opposed to specifically fashion, but I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yes,
Go on, Chris.
It's three quick things. I think, first of all, the most important thing is to understand that you have to speak to the consumer, and that sounds very loose, but I work with a lot of brands. I see a lot of brands from the more objective bird's eye point of view as a journalist, but also working with brands internally. You actually see how old school a lot of the thinking still is. It's still very much that in the ivory tower mindset. What you literally have to do is, whether it's a focus group or whether it's actually speaking to your kids and their friends, how are they shopping? Think of yourself as a consumer again. How do you want to shop? You have to have that line more connected. Otherwise, you're always going to be behind. If you listen to all the experts, so to say, or just read the articles. The second thing is, I think, to a certain extent, is that you really have to merge that digital with that physical respect. People always think Gen Z only likes to shop digitally. That's not the truth. 60% of the audience says that they can't wait to go back into shops again. That's an important way of information for them as well. They actually list multi-brand retailers, which is a funny thing, as one of the biggest things that influence them in terms of shopping. Then the third thing, and I'll try to make this a quick one, is the biggest takeaway I can give outside of the two things I just mentioned is try to spend more focus, if you're a marketeer, on the inspiration phase. That basically means when people are still getting acquainted to your brand. For the longest time, because the return on investment was much more clearer during the purchasing and post-purchasing phase, a lot of marketeers would focus on that to really try to hard sell things to people. What we've actually seen is that 50% of Gen Z focus or make their purchasing decision during that inspiration phase. That's 35% more than Gen X. So that's how fast that's growing. 70% of Gen Z are looking at that phase and spending time there to inspire others and be inspired. And that means everything from, different things with cameras, working with Snap, or whether that is going into the stores and browsing or being with the consumers essentially. You have to focus on that inspiration phase and find a way to still find those return on investments and look at those specific metrics. But you have to, this is not the time to be safe, so to say. So test it all, I would say.
Fantastic. That's great advice, Chris. I think those points on consumer, following the consumer, looking at their habits and what they're doing, looking at kind of at the multi-touch points, and then also the inspiration phase being a really kind of powerful moment in terms of future shopping. And of course, I think, when you're thinking about communication through the camera or the shopping experience, most people are carrying their smartphone and their camera with them at all times, which increases the relevance for an ongoing camera strategy, I believe. Chris, thank you so much. Really interesting to hear from you. Delighted that you were able to join us today. And with that, I will pass over to Sam for some closing comments.
Thank you, Will, and thank you, Chris. And thank you all so much for dialing in. We are hitting time, but we did just want to say a huge thank you again to each and every one of you for joining the Snap Visionary Club. We are so excited to partner with each and every one of you. And like you heard today, Snap has a wealth of options for e-commerce and direct-to-consumer brands to scale their businesses, but ultimately to partner with us to help inform and evolve what shopping looks like for this entire new generation. I want to thank you again, and most importantly, I look forward to partnering with each and every one of you. Speak to you soon.